Good morning, welcome back. The math problem for today deals with the topic of channels of communication. You may have heard that sometimes if you have a really large team, it's harder to communicate. If you have a smaller team, communication goes a little bit easier. So the question for you is, how many channels of communication are there if on your team there are 3 people, if there are 4 people, and if there are 5 people? So how many channels of communication are there if you have 3 people on your team, 4 people, and 5 people? And I'll just give a bit of an example. So if you had 3 people, if you had person A, person B, person C, now A could communicate with B, A could communicate with C, C could communicate with B, and C could communicate with A, B could communicate with A, and B could communicate with C. So you can see in this case we've got the 6 possible channels of communication. So that's the situation if we have 3 people on our team. And what if you have 4 or 5 people on your team? Quite often when you're dealing with product development, you have multiple people on your team. You have what's called a cross-disciplinary team. For example, an engineer, maybe a marketer, maybe a salesperson, maybe a finance accounting person. And you have these teams of people that work on projects. And you'd assume that the bigger the team is, the faster things go. But it doesn't always work that way because of this thing of channels of communication. So the challenge for you today is to think about how many channels of communication would you have if you had 4 people on your team or if you had 5 people on your team. There's a formula behind this if you want to do a bit of research. So there's one way of doing it is just to manually draw it out, but there's actually a formula that I'll cover in the answer. We'll see you shortly with the answer. Welcome to our Design, Make, Play Math Challenge answer. Now this question was looking at the channels of communication. How many channels of communication are there if you have a project with 3 people, with 4 people, or with 5 people? And it can be actually any number of people. There's a formula you can use to calculate this that I'll go through in just a minute. So first of all, if we have 3 people on a project, person A, person B, and person C, we can see that there's 3 possible channels of communication between A and B, between A and C, and between C and B. So if you have a project with just 3 people, it's fairly easy to manage the channels of communication. Now if you have 4 people, A, B, C, and D, you can see that there's the communication between A and C, A and B, and A and D, as well as between B and C, and D and A, and so altogether you have 6 channels of communication. You have twice as many channels of communication. And when that occurs, there's a lot greater likelihood that you might have miscommunication and misunderstandings and taking longer to update everyone, all that sort of thing. And so sometimes adding more people to a project doesn't always speed it up. It can actually slow it down. There's something called Brooks' Law, which is about software projects, that adding more people to a late software project makes it even more late. And so part of that is to do with communications. Now there's this really cool formula, n equals n times n minus 1, all divided by 2. this will calculate mathematically how many channels of communication you have depending on how many people there are, and this would be the n. So for example, with 3 people, that would be equals 3 times 3 minus 1, which is 2. So 3 times 2 divided by 2 would be equal to 3, and that's what we found here as well. Let's try it with 4. 4 times 4 minus 1, so 4 times 3, which is 12, divided by 2 is equal to 6. So the answer to this one is there's 6 possible channels of communication. Now let's take a look at 5. If we have 5 people in the team, that's going to be n equals 5 times 5 minus 1, which is 4, divided by 2. So 5 times 4, which is 20, divided by 2 equals 10. So this would have 10 possible channels of communication. So you can see this number is growing quite quickly from 3 to 6 to 10. Now imagine you had 10 people on a project. That's not such a big number for a team working on something. If you had 10, you'd have 10 times 10 minus 1, which is 9, which would be 90, divided by 2, which would be 45. So if you have a team of 10 people, there's 45 possible channels of communication. And that's a lot of potential room for misunderstandings, miscommunication, people not being in the loop, all that sort of thing. So this is why usually project teams are relatively small. Quite often like 5 to 7 is kind of about as big as you want for a core team. So that is the answer to today's math challenge. How many channels of communication if you have 3 people, 4 people, or 5 people on a project? And the answer is 3 people, 3 channels of communication, 6 channels of communication, and 10 channels of communication. You can do this manually by a diagram, or easier, you can use this handy formula. That's it for today's Design, Make, Play math challenge. Hope you enjoyed that one. Take care.